My name is Gavin Vance, and on the 15th of March, I was forced to confront a harsh, undeniable truth about the modern corporate hierarchy. 32 years of loyalty, clean performance evaluations, and successfully built multi-million-dollar business lines mean absolutely nothing when measured against the bruised, fragile ego of a CEO's wife. I was standing in my private office at 7 o'clock in the morning, organizing the physical and digital folders of our quarterly logistics reports for our East Asian shipping corridors. The morning sun was just starting to filter through the blinds, casting long metallic shadows across my mahogany desk. Everything in my workspace was arranged with mathematical precision, reflecting the structured logic I had brought to Montgomery Global Logistics for over 3 decades. Suddenly, the heavy door burst open. Victoria Montgomery swept into the room like a tropical storm, her high-end designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She was dressed in an expensive designer pantsuit that probably cost more than a junior coordinator made in a month. Her face, which was usually sculpted and frozen in a mask of polite social superiority, was flushed with pure anger. Her eyes were wide and filled with rage as she pointed a diamond-encrusted finger directly at my face. She did not even bother to close the door behind her, leaving our confrontation open to anyone, walking down the executive hallway. "You will be terminated by the end of this business day, Gavin," she said, her voice trembling and dripping with venom. "Last night at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, you deliberately and publicly insulted me. When I walked past your corporate table, you sat there like an arrogant peasant and ignored my presence. Montgomery Global Logistics has absolutely no room for employees who lack basic respect and common decency." I stared at her, keeping my expression entirely neutral, though I felt a cold, sharp sensation tightening in my chest. I had spent 3 long years at this specific subsidiary, working late into the night, sacrificing my weekends, missing family dinners, and giving my life to build their international operations division from a small 2-client desk into a powerhouse that managed 47 major corporate shipping accounts. I had personally established our logistics networks across East Asia, dealing with complex trade laws, international maritime agreements, and regulatory compliance. I had spent years of my life navigating the complicated corridors of global commerce to ensure the company's survival. Yet, here was Victoria Montgomery, the wife of our Chief Executive Officer, Charles Montgomery, demanding my immediate termination because she felt I had not jumped up and bowed fast enough to her at a social event. She did not know who I really was outside the corporate office, and she certainly had no idea that her sudden, vindictive campaign to destroy my career would lead to the complete exposure of her own dark secrets. Before I explain the satisfying revenge that followed, let me take you back to how this bizarre situation started 8 months earlier. To understand this conflict, one must understand the environment at Montgomery Global Logistics. The firm, founded by Charles's father, had grown into a massive enterprise. However, Charles had a blind spot when it came to his wife. Victoria had no formal training in logistics or supply chain management, yet she held a highly lucrative consultant position within the company. She was paid a handsome salary, and her influence over executive decisions was a constant source of frustration for the senior management. Most directors chose to quiet their objections and placate her whims, knowing that crossing Victoria was a quick path to professional exile. I had always managed to keep my distance, focusing entirely on my operational duties. My daily routine was consuming, leaving little room for corporate games. I oversaw a team of 15 operations specialists coordinating shipping schedules, negotiating carrier rates, and resolving customs disputes across multiple time zones. Our division was the engine of the company, generating over 60% of its annual revenue. I took pride in my work, believing that performance and integrity were the only metrics that mattered. I was naive enough to think that my contribution protected me from the shifting winds of executive politics. That belief evaporated the moment Victoria pointed her finger at me. 8 months prior to that morning, my life had been thrown into turmoil by a family crisis. My 58-year-old sister, Clara Vance, had fallen seriously ill with a rare autoimmune disorder that required specialized, experimental treatments. The medical bills began to accumulate rapidly, far exceeding what her insurance was willing to cover. As her primary support system, I took on the financial responsibility, determined to ensure she received the best possible medical care. Despite my comfortable salary as a director, the costs were overwhelming, amounting to $15,000 a month. I needed a substantial, reliable source of secondary income that would not interfere with my demanding daytime schedule. Because of my decades of experience in international operations, I was fluent in Mandarin Chinese, a language I had studied intensely and spoken daily during my 10 years working in Beijing. I began searching for high-paying freelance tutoring opportunities and applied for a listing on Scholar Match, an elite academic platform that matched private language instructors with wealthy, high-profile clients who demanded complete discretion. The platform offered an extraordinary rate of $300 per hour-long session, which was exactly the financial buffet I needed to cover Clara's medical expenses. To maintain a strict professional boundary and keep my corporate identity completely separate from my tutoring work, I applied under an alias, using my middle name and my mother's maiden name. I introduced myself as Donald Sharp. To further protect my identity, I altered my appearance during the tutoring sessions. I wore thick, black-rimmed reading glasses, left my gray hair messy and unstyled, and dressed in casual academic clothing like tweed jackets with elbow patches and loose-fitting corduroy trousers. This was a complete contrast to my appearance at Montgomery Global Logistics, where I wore tailored charcoal suits, kept my hair neatly parted, and wore contact lenses. The client who hired me was a wealthy woman who introduced herself only as Eva, and she lived in a luxurious penthouse. When I first met her at her residence, she made it immediately clear how she viewed people who worked in service roles. "I need to be conversational in Mandarin within 6 months," she told me, without offering a greeting or inviting me to sit down. "I do not want basic tourist phrases. I need to be able to participate in business meetings and negotiate complex contracts. Can you do that, or am I wasting my time?" I nodded politely, swallowing my pride for the sake of the income. "Mandarin is a complex language, but we can make significant progress if you commit to the work," I replied, keeping my voice low and slightly raspy to distinguish it from my normal corporate speaking tone. Within the first 10 minutes of our first lesson, it became obvious that Ava had no natural aptitude for the language. She struggled with the basic tones, mispronounced simple greetings, and became defensive whenever I corrected her mistakes. Despite her frustration, she was determined to continue, driven by an ambition that I would only fully understand later. In those early weeks, my main focus was to ensure she mastered the fundamental pronunciation. Mandarin has 4 distinct tones, and a single misstep can entirely change the meaning of a word. Confusing the word for mother with the word for horse can lead to embarrassing situations in a business meeting. I explained this to Eva, trying to emphasize the importance of patient practice, but she was always in a hurry. She wanted to skip the basics and immediately start memorizing complex business dialogues. I had to repeatedly pull her back to the foundation, which only increased her irritation. She would huff, roll her eyes, and make dismissive remarks about how the language was unnecessarily difficult. Yet, because I needed the money for Clara's medical treatments, I kept my composure, smiled politely, and continued to guide her through the exercises. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, I would drive to the high-rise building, clear security at the desk using my consultant credentials, and take the service elevator up to her penthouse. The penthouse itself was a monument to wealth. The floors were polished white marble, and the walls were adorned with modern abstract paintings. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of the city skyline, but the space felt cold and sterile, much like Eva's attitude. She rarely asked about my day or showed any interest in me as a human being. To her, I was simply a service provider, a person she paid to perform a task. She even instructed me to use the service entrance after the second week, claiming the main lobby should be kept clear for residents. I agreed without arguing, as my primary concern was securing the funds to help my sister Clara. I would quietly walk through the back hallway, take the service elevator, and enter her apartment through the kitchen door. This treatment was humiliating, but my professional discipline and my personal commitment to my family kept me focused. I knew that my sister's health was far more important than my temporary discomfort, and I was willing to tolerate Victoria's arrogance if it meant paying off the medical bills. As the lessons progressed into the second and third months, the difficulty only increased. Eva had no patience for memorizing characters or understanding grammatical structures. She wanted shortcuts. She constantly asked me to write out the Chinese words using English letters, a system known as pinyin, but even then, she would ignore the tone marks. I explained to her that without the correct tones, her speech would sound like complete gibberish to native speakers. She dismissed my warnings, believing that her status and confidence would carry her through. In business, confidence is 70% of the battle. She would say during our sessions, "They will see my poise, my expensive wardrobe, hear me speaking their language, and they will be impressed." I simply nodded and documented her progress, or lack thereof, in my session logs. As the months went on, Eva began to share the reasons behind her sudden interest in learning Mandarin. She revealed that she was preparing for what she called a $50 million joint venture with a group of major Chinese investors. She had convinced her husband and their social circle that she was fluent in the language and that she was the perfect person to act as the primary liaison. "My husband thinks I have a natural gift for languages," she boasted. "Everyone at the country club is so impressed when I use Mandarin phrases. They have no idea how these deals actually work. It is all about the image." While Victoria was pretending to be a brilliant international business expert, I was at my day job actually managing the logistics and compliance for our company's Asian operations. The situation became more complicated 6 weeks before the scheduled presentation. Victoria was practicing her speech for the investors, and it was a complete disaster. She could not remember basic business terms and was speaking gibberish with a confident tone. "This is not going to work," I told her honestly. "You need to focus on the core concepts before trying to deliver a complex business pitch." Her face turned red with anger. "Are you calling me incompetent?" she demanded. "Not at all," I said calmly. "But Mandarin requires years of study to master at a business level. You cannot expect to fake it without a solid foundation." She took a deep breath, trying to control her temper. "This deal is my chance to prove myself," she admitted. "I want to be seen as a partner in the business world, not just a wife who stays at home. You have to help me get through this." I agreed to write a detailed phonetic script for her entire presentation and spend extra hours helping her memorize it word for word. Over the next month, we practiced the script repeatedly. I also coached her on Chinese business etiquette, proper bowing techniques, and cultural expectations. She began to treat me with slightly more respect, though she still viewed me as hired help. During one evening session, she looked at the framed certificate on her office wall. It was an advanced Mandarin language and cultural competency certification supposedly issued by the East Asian Language Institute. "I had this made years ago," she said with a smirk. "It helps reassure the board that I am qualified to handle these high-level negotiations." I looked closely at the certificate, and my heart stopped. During my years in Beijing, I had actually helped establish the certification standards for that exact institute. I knew their verification process and the signatures of their directors. The signature on Victoria's certificate belonged to a director whose term had ended 5 years before the date on the document, and the serial number did not follow the institute's sequence. It was a complete forgery created to deceive the board of directors and secure her a lucrative consultant contract with Montgomery Global Logistics that paid her $250,000 annually. I quietly took a high-resolution photograph of the certificate with my phone, knowing that this document was a violation of California Penal Codes, Section 470, which covers the forgery of documents to obtain money or contracts. Under California law, a contract obtained through fraud is void ab initio, meaning it has no legal standing from the beginning, and any funds paid under it must be returned. This discovery changed the entire dynamic of my tutoring sessions. I realized that Victoria was actively committing corporate fraud against the company where I was employed. Her husband, Charles Montgomery, had likely helped her secure the consulting contract, representing her to the board as an expert in East Asian business relations. If the board discovered that she had submitted a forged certificate, both of their careers would be in severe jeopardy. I decided to keep this information to myself for the time being, continuing to record our tutoring sessions as permitted by the contract she had signed through the academic agency. The contract had a clause allowing the tutor to record sessions for quality assurance and progress tracking, a detail she had completely overlooked. I kept these video files organized in a secure folder on my cloud storage. Each recording showed her struggling with basic vocabulary, asking me to write out English transliterations, and admitting that she did not know the actual meanings of the phrases she was memorizing. I also documented her instructions regarding the creation of the presentations. During these tutoring sessions, I watched her struggle to pronounce words that any elementary student of the language would master in a few days. She was particularly frustrated by the vocabulary associated with supply chain logistics, trade tariffs, and regional distribution networks. She could not grasp the difference between terms for sea freight and air cargo, and her attempts to discuss regulatory compliance were laughably inaccurate. Despite this, she insisted that I include these technical details in her presentation script, believing that the mere mention of these complex concepts would make her appear highly competent. Writing the phonetic guide for her to memorize while ensuring that every session was meticulously documented. I knew that the discrepancy between her claimed qualifications and her actual performance was growing wider by the day, and the forged certificate on her wall was the definitive proof of her deception. 2 weeks before the presentation, Victoria was able to deliver the memorized script reasonably well. She could not hold a real conversation, but she could fake the introduction. "I will be spectacular," she declared as we finished our last session. "Those investors will be highly impressed. This deal will change everything for us." I wished her luck and packed my things. She mentioned that she was attending the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala that weekend, noting that all the city's major business figures would be there. I realized there was a strong chance we would cross paths, as our company was a primary sponsor of the event. At the gala, I sat at our corporate table alongside the senior operations team. I wore a tailored black tuxedo, had my hair slicked back, and wore contact lenses instead of my tutoring glasses. Halfway through the dinner, I saw Victoria walk into the room wearing an elegant gown and standing next to CEO Charles Montgomery. It was at that moment that the pieces fell into place. My difficult tutoring client was the CEO's wife, Victoria Montgomery. I spent the rest of the evening trying to avoid her, hoping she would not recognize me. As I was returning to my table after dinner, Victoria walked past. My colleague Oliver Finch called out my name, Gavin, to ask a question. I looked up, and my eyes met Victoria's for a brief second. I saw a look of confusion on her face, but she quickly turned away and kept walking. I believed the danger had passed. However, I underestimated her paranoia. Victoria had spent the night trying to figure out why my face was familiar. Fearing that I might recognize her or expose her lack of language skills, she decided to protect herself by attacking first. She claimed that I had deliberately insulted her by not standing up when she passed our table, turning a moment of near recognition into a professional crisis. She knew that if I remained in the company, there was a constant risk that she would be exposed. "You are done here, Gavin," Charles Montgomery told me later that morning after his wife had left my office. His face was grim, and he refused to look me in the eye. "I cannot have this kind of conflict affecting my home life. I will give you a good reference and a fair severance package, but you need to leave." I looked at him, refusing to let my anger show. "You are terminating a director of operations who has brought 47 international clients to this firm, because your wife claims I did not stand up fast enough at a dinner," I asked, keeping my voice calm and steady. "It does not matter," Charles sighed. "She has made her decision, and I have to support her choice. Arguing will not change anything." I smiled slightly and opened my laptop. "Before you sign those termination papers, there is something you should see," I said. I sent him an email containing several video files from our tutoring sessions, showing Victoria struggling with basic greetings and admitting that she did not understand the language she was supposed to use for the $50 million deal. Charles's face turned pale as he watched the videos. "What is this?" he whispered. "Your wife hired me under the name Donald Sharp to write a phonetic script for her presentation," I explained, removing my reading glasses from my pocket and letting my hair fall forward to match my tutoring appearance. She cannot speak Mandarin. If the investors ask her a single question outside of the memorized text, the entire deal will collapse. Furthermore, I suggest you look at this. I showed him the photo of her forged certificate on my phone. This document is a clear violation of California Penal Code, Section 470. She used a forged credential to secure a $250,000 annual consulting contract from this company. If you proceed with my termination to cover up this fraud, you will be committing a serious breach of your fiduciary duty to the shareholders, and I will report this forgery directly to the board's audit committee and the district attorney. The silence in the office was absolute. Charles sat behind his desk, staring at the screen in disbelief. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Why keep this from me?" I replied, gathering my personal items. "Because I respect client confidentiality. But since your wife has chosen to destroy my career based on a lie, I am no longer bound by that professional courtesy. The choice is yours, Charles. You can explain to the board why their $50 million deal fell apart, or you can face the legal consequences of her actions." I walked out of the building, leaving my security badge on his desk. As I walked out of the corporate headquarters, I felt a sense of relief. For years, I had tolerated the corporate politics and the high pressure, but being terminated for such a ridiculous reason was the final straw. I knew that the ball was now in Charles's court. He was trapped between the legal liability of his wife's actions and her irrational demands. I went home, spent the afternoon checking on my sister Clara, and began preparing my resume for other logistics firms. I knew my skills were in high demand, and I would have no trouble finding another position. However, I also knew that the upcoming presentation was going to be an absolute train wreck for Montgomery Global Logistics. The board of directors had high expectations for the joint venture. The company had spent months preparing the financial modeling and local operations plans. My team had put in hundreds of hours of research to ensure that our logistics framework could support the influx of business from the Chinese market. All of that hard work was now resting on the shoulders of a woman who could not even ask for directions in Mandarin without a cheat sheet. I knew the investors, Mr. Sun Wei and Miss Zhang Mei, were highly professional individuals who would not tolerate being deceived. They expected a partner who possessed a deep understanding of their language and customs, not a trophy wife pretending to be a corporate liaison. I spent the next few days monitoring the situation through my contacts. My senior operations manager, Oliver Finch, informed me that the atmosphere in the executive suite was incredibly tense. Charles had canceled all of his external meetings and was spending hours behind closed doors with the legal team. Meanwhile, Victoria was reportedly in a state of panic, calling the academic tutoring platform to demand my contact details and attempting to hire a replacement tutor at the last minute. Of course, no qualified tutor could help her master months of technical business language in 72 hours. She was trapped in a web of her own making, and she knew it. The presentation was scheduled for Friday morning, and the clock was ticking down. Over the next 3 days, I received several angry phone calls and voicemails from Victoria. She threatened to sue me for violating the tutoring agreement. I returned her call once, keeping my tone professional. "Victoria, you should consult a lawyer before you make those threats," I said. Under California law, a non-disclosure agreement cannot be enforced to cover up criminal activities like forgery and corporate fraud. You used a forged certificate to obtain corporate funds, which is a felony under California Penal Code, Section 470. If you continue to threaten me, I will release the evidence immediately. The line went quiet and she hung up without another word. I knew she was cornered, and her threats were nothing more than empty bravado. On the morning of the presentation, the Chinese delegation arrived at the corporate headquarters. Mr. Sun Wei and Miss Zhang Mei were experienced executives who expected to discuss the details of the joint venture with a qualified partner. According to my colleagues, Victoria locked herself in the executive bathroom shortly after their arrival, panicking because she could not handle the casual conversation during the pre-meeting lunch. At 10 o'clock, Charles called me, his voice filled with desperation. "Gavin, please," he begged. "The investors are asking detailed questions, and Victoria cannot answer them. If this deal falls apart, we will have to lay off 30% of our staff. I will reinstate you immediately, give you a significant raise, and support your promotion to Vice President of International Business Development. Just help us save this contract." I hesitated, thinking of the employees in my division who had worked hard to build these relationships. Under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, also known as the Warnin Act, codified under Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101, a company is required to provide 60 days advance notice for mass layoffs, but the financial fallout of losing this contract would bypass any protections and destroy their livelihoods. They did not deserve to lose their jobs because of the greed and incompetence of the CEO's wife. "I will come in as an independent consultant for this meeting," I agreed. "But I am doing this to protect my team, not to save your wife's reputation, and I expect my reinstatement papers to be signed before the meeting ends." When I arrived at the conference room, the tension was high. Victoria was standing near the projector screen, her hands shaking. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and relief. "Just stay in the corner and translate," she whispered. "This is still my deal." I did not reply, taking my seat. The presentation began, and Victoria delivered her memorized introduction. Her pronunciation was stiff, but she managed to get through the first 10 minutes. However, the presentation quickly fell apart when Miss Zhang Mei raised her hand to ask a question. "Could you explain how the new customs regulations in Shanghai will impact our shipping timeline?" she asked in Mandarin. Victoria stared at her, unable to comprehend a single word. "I am sorry. Could we address that in English?" Victoria asked, her face turning red. Miss Zhang repeated the question in Mandarin, speaking slower, but Victoria could only offer a confused response that made no grammatical sense. Mr. Sunway frowned, exchanging a concerned look with his colleague. The investors were beginning to realize that the person they had been promised as a fluent liaison was completely unqualified. Victoria looked at me desperately. "Perhaps my consultant can answer that," she said, her voice trembling. I stood up and addressed the investors in fluent Mandarin, explaining the regulatory changes, the compliance requirements, and the steps we had taken to minimize potential delays. Mr. Sun and Miss Zhang nodded in approval, immediately shifting their attention to me. For the next half hour, I answered all of their questions regarding logistics, legal frameworks, and operational strategies. Victoria was left standing to the side, completely ignored. As the discussion progressed, it became clear that the investors had no interest in communicating with Victoria. They recognized that she was merely a figurehead. They directed all of their technical and operational inquiries to me, and we engaged in a detailed professional dialogue. I explained how our logistics division could optimize their supply chain, reduce shipping costs, and navigate complex customs procedures. The board members present in the room watched in silence, realizing that the success of the $50 million deal depended entirely on my expertise, not on the CEO's wife. Victoria's face grew more flushed by the minute, her hands tightly clenching the edge of the podium. As I walked the investors through the detailed logistics maps, I showed them the specific ports we utilized, the secondary transport routes we had established to bypass congested areas, and the customs clearance agreements we had negotiated with local officials. Mr. Sun Wei asked several highly technical questions regarding cargo insurance and liability limits. These were complex issues that required a deep understanding of maritime law and international trade agreements. I answered each question thoroughly and precisely. The board members began to relax as they saw the positive reaction from the Chinese delegation. Ms. Zhang Mei took detailed notes, frequently nodding in agreement. Victoria remained completely silent, her initial arrogance entirely deflated. She had wanted the glory, but she had none of the knowledge required. After the presentation concluded, the investors requested a private meeting with the board members. Ms. Zhang Mei approached me before entering the room. "We are very impressed by your professionalism and knowledge, Mr. Vance," she said in Mandarin. but we cannot enter a partnership with a company that allows unqualified individuals to lead such critical negotiations. We will only proceed with this deal if you are placed in charge of the entire operation." Once the investors left, I walked straight to the board's audit committee, which was holding an emergency session. I presented the video recordings of the tutoring sessions and the photograph of the forged certification. I explained the legal implications under California Penal Code, Section 470, and the potential liability the company faced for paying a consultant based on fraudulent credentials. The board members were shocked by the evidence. They realized that keeping Victoria on the payroll was a massive legal risk that could lead to shareholder lawsuits and federal investigations. Within 24 hours, the board terminated Victoria's consulting contract and ordered her to return all funds she had received. They also stripped Charles Montgomery of his unilateral authority over executive decisions and forced him to sign a formal written apology to me. I was officially reinstated and promoted to Senior Vice President of Global Operations, receiving a substantial salary increase, a seat on the executive committee, and complete control over the international division. 6 months later, I successfully closed the partnership with Mr. Sun and Miss Zhang, securing a deal worth $68 million, which was $18 million more than the original proposal. Victoria Montgomery became a social outcast, her reputation ruined by the exposure of her lies and the forged certificate. The story of her failed presentation and the tutoring videos became common knowledge, and she was forced to withdraw from her charity committees. Sometimes the natural consequences of a person's choices are the most effective form of justice. Victoria tried to destroy my career to protect her own vanity, but her actions only served to expose her fraud and elevate me to the position I had earned through years of hard work. In the end, competence and integrity proved to be far more powerful than fabricated credentials and corporate influence. True respect cannot be demanded through threats or inherited through marriage. It must be earned through hard work, expertise, and mutual respect. I continue to manage our global operations with a focus on integrity, ensuring that our team members are valued for their contributions. As for Victoria, she has reportedly moved on to trying to learn Spanish, but I hope her next tutor is prepared. The new position has allowed me to implement significant operational reforms. I have established a strict merit-based promotion policy, ensuring that no executive can appoint unqualified family members to critical consulting positions. Our division has continued to grow, expanding our operations into other Southeast Asian markets and establishing new partnerships. My sister Clara has fully recovered, and her medical expenses are completely paid off thanks to the salary increase and the bonuses from the successful joint venture. Looking back, I realized that Victoria's attempt to ruin my career was the catalyst for my greatest professional success. By standing up for myself and using the truth as my weapon, I not only protected my own livelihood, but also secured the future of my entire team. In the corporate world, the best revenge is not malice. It is achieving a level of success that makes your enemies completely irrelevant. The official resolution of the dispute was documented in the company's permanent records. The board's legal counsel drafted a formal settlement agreement that acknowledged my contributions, confirmed the wrongful nature of my brief termination, and provided a comprehensive release of all claims. This document was signed by the chairman of the board and Charles Montgomery himself. The corporate apology was circulated to all department heads, clarifying that my reinstatement was based on my performance and the critical role I played in securing the East Asian partnership. This public acknowledgement put an end to any rumors that Victoria had tried to spread. It was a clear statement that in our company, professional competence would no longer be sidelined for personal convenience. I continue to lead our global expansion with the same dedication, knowing that the foundation we built is strong enough to withstand any challenge.